The blood on Dante Valerian's collar wasn't his own, but the lipstick staining his jaw belonged to someone who wasn't his wife. He stood in the marble foyer of his estate at 4 in the morning, keys still dangling from his fingers, completely unprepared for what waited in the shadows of his own home. The lights blazed on with violent suddenness, and there she was. Isla. His wife of 7 years sat in his grandfather's leather armchair like a queen presiding over a condemned man's final judgment. But this wasn't the Isla he'd grown comfortable dismissing, the one who smiled through charity galas and never questioned his late nights. This woman had eyes like shattered glass, sharp enough to draw blood with a glance. "Welcome home, husband." Her voice carried the kind of calm that precedes hurricanes. Or should I say, welcome back from Sienna's penthouse apartment? The one you bought her 3 months ago on our anniversary. Dante's blood turned to ice. His hand instinctively moved toward his phone, toward the network of men who cleaned up his messes, but Isla's cold laugh stopped him. "Your men work for money, Dante. I work for revenge. And I've been planning this for 6 months. On the mahogany coffee table between them lay a manila envelope. It looked innocent enough, but Dante had spent 20 years in the Valerian crime family. He knew that the most dangerous weapons rarely looked threatening until they'd already destroyed you. "I could have done this the traditional way," Isla continued, crossing her legs with deliberate grace. She wore a red dress he'd never seen before. "Screaming, crying, begging you to change. But I'm not interested in your promises anymore. I'm interested in your empire." She stood, and for the first time since he'd inherited his father's position as head of the Valerian organization, Dante Valerian felt genuine fear. Not the adrenaline of a drug deal gone wrong or a rival family's threat. This was the terror of realizing you'd underestimated the one person who knew every single one of your secrets. "Those papers are your divorce settlement," Isla said, her heels clicking against marble as she moved closer. "I'm taking the villa in Tuscany, the vineyard in Napa, and 40% of your legitimate business holdings. The ones you use to launder money from your less legitimate enterprises. You can't prove. I can prove everything." Her smile could have cut diamonds. "Your offshore accounts in the Caymans. The shell corporations in Delaware. The bribes you've paid to Judge Morrison. The warehouse fire in 2019 that killed 3 people. Everything." Dante's jaw clenched. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Isla pulled out her phone, tapped the screen twice, and his own voice filled the room, a recording from 18 months ago, discussing a weapons shipment with his underboss, Victor. "I have 47 recordings. 83 photographs. Bank statements. Emails. Text messages with Sienna where you discussed using company funds for her shopping trips." The room tilted. Dante reached for the chair to steady himself. "Isla, what do you want?" "I want you to sign those papers. I want you to understand that you destroyed the only person who ever loved the man beneath the monster." Her voice cracked for just a moment, revealing the wound beneath her armor. "And I want you to know that by the time the sun rises, the FBI will have copies of everything unless you give me exactly what I'm asking for. You'd destroy yourself too. You're my wife. You're complicit. I have full immunity." She pulled out a second folder. "Courtesy of Special Agent Rachel Torres, who's been building a case against you for 3 years. I've been her informant for 6 months. Every deal, every meeting, every crime you've committed since last spring. I gave them everything." Dante's world imploded. The woman he'd married fresh out of Columbia Law School, the woman he'd thought was content to spend his money and look beautiful at his side, had systematically dismantled his entire life. "Why not just have them arrest me?" "Because death is too quick and prison is too kind." Isla's eyes glittered with unshed tears and steel-hard resolve. "I want you to live every day knowing that you did this to yourself. That while you were between Sienna's sheets, I was downloading files from your private server. That every kiss you gave her cost you a piece of your empire. She walked to the door, then paused. You have until 6 a.m. to sign. Your lawyer, Kenneth? He's been working with me for 4 months. He'll explain the terms. If you don't sign, Agent Torres gets everything, and you'll spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. If you do sign, you keep your freedom and 50% of your holdings. Your choice. Isla, wait. But she was already gone, leaving only the scent of her perfume and the ruins of everything Dante Valerian had built. He sank into the chair, picked up the envelope with shaking hands, and began to read the terms of his own destruction. Outside, dawn began to break over Chicago. And Dante Valerian, the man who'd never lost a war, realized he'd just lost the only battle that mattered. The question wasn't whether he'd sign. The question was how he'd never seen it coming. 7 years earlier, Dante Valerian had walked into a charity gala believing he was untouchable. At 28, he'd just inherited control of his family's organization after his father's sudden death. The Valerians had controlled Chicago's North Side for 3 generations, their wealth laundered through restaurants, real estate, and a network of legitimate businesses that would make any MBA student weep with admiration. He wasn't looking for a wife that night. He was looking for someone to photograph well beside him, someone whose pedigree would help legitimize his public image. His mother had insisted he needed to settle down, to project stability to both his organization and the FBI agents who constantly circled like sharks. Then Isla Moretti walked up to him with champagne in her hand and intelligence burning in her dark eyes. You're Dante Valerian, she'd said, not a question but an accusation. Your family donated $250,000 to this hospital wing, but you charged them $300,000 in overpriced construction work. You're literally laundering money through children's cancer research. He should have walked away. Instead, he'd laughed. You always lead with felony accusations at parties? Only when I'm talking to felons. She'd smiled then, and it had hit him like a bullet to the chest. I'm Isla Moretti. I graduated Columbia Law last month. Top of my class. I'm starting at Bennett and Associates in 3 weeks, doing corporate defense. Defending people like me? Hopefully putting people like you away. She'd taken a sip of champagne, her eyes never leaving his. But I figured I should know my enemy. He'd fallen for her that night. Not the soft, romantic falling that poets write about, but the hard, desperate falling of a man who'd never encountered anyone who saw through his carefully constructed walls. She knew exactly who he was, what he was, and she looked at him like he was both a challenge and a catastrophe waiting to happen. They'd married 8 months later in a ceremony that made the society pages. Dante's mother wept with joy. His underboss, Victor, had taken him aside and warned him that marrying someone that smart was dangerous. Dante had ignored him. He'd thought he could control Isla, shape her into the perfect Mafia wife. That had been his first mistake. Now, standing in his study as dawn light filtered through bulletproof windows, Dante read through the divorce papers and saw just how thoroughly he'd miscalculated. Kenneth Rothman, his lawyer for 15 years, had written an addendum explaining the situation with the clinical precision of a surgeon describing a terminal diagnosis. Mrs. Valerian had been wearing a wire for 6 months. She had documented evidence of 27 separate felonies. She had testimony from 3 different witnesses about the warehouse fire. She had records of every bribe, every illegal shipment, every body buried in the metaphorical and literal sense. But the truly brilliant part? She'd structured the divorce settlement to look completely legitimate. She wasn't asking for anything unusual, nothing that would raise red flags. A wronged wife getting her fair share. The FBI would get their case against him only if he refused to sign, only if he chose his pride over his freedom. Dante's phone buzzed. Victor. Boss, we've got a problem. Someone leaked information about the Kowalski deal to the Tribune. They're running a story tomorrow about our involvement in the South Side development. Of course they were. Isla had probably tipped them off months ago, setting up dominoes to fall in perfect sequence. Every piece of his empire she couldn't claim in divorce, she'd destroy through exposure. Victor, I need you to dig into Isla's life. Her phone records, her movements, her. Already tried, boss. She's clean. Whatever she's done it smart. My guy couldn't find anything except her going to the gym, her book club, and some coffee shop on the north side. That coffee shop. Dante's mind raced. 6 months ago, Isla had joined a book club. She'd told him it was nice to have friends outside his world. He'd been relieved she'd found something to occupy her time while he was with Sienna. She'd been planning his destruction over lattes and hardcover novels. The clock read 5:47 a.m. 13 minutes until his deadline. Dante looked at the papers, at his lawyer's note, at the evidence of his wife's methodical vengeance. He thought about calling Sienna, but what would be the point? She'd been an escape, a pretty distraction who told him what he wanted to hear. She didn't know him. She'd never seen beneath the surface to the darkness that lived there. Isla had seen it all, and she decided he wasn't worth the shadows. His phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Valerian, this is Special Agent Rachel Torres. I understand you have a decision to make. I want you to know that Mrs. Valerian came to us, not the other way around. She walked into my office 6 months ago with evidence of your crimes and a proposition. I tell you this because I want you to understand something. She could have buried you. Instead, she gave you a choice. That's more mercy than you showed her. The line went dead. Dante picked up his pen. His hand hovered over the signature line. 7 years of marriage destroyed by his arrogance. An empire built over 3 generations, hanging by the thread of his wife's mercy. He thought about his father, about the old man's constant warnings. The people closest to you are always the most dangerous. At 5:59 a.m., Dante Valerian signed the divorce papers. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. The coffee shop where Isla had supposedly attended book club meetings for 6 months was called The Sanctuary. Dante had driven past it 1,000 times without ever noticing it, tucked between a vintage bookstore and a yoga studio in a neighborhood too quiet for his usual haunts. 3 days after signing the divorce papers, he found himself sitting in his car across the street, watching. He'd signed his empire away, but he hadn't signed away his need to understand how she'd done it. How the woman he'd married, the one who'd smiled through his lies and looked beautiful on his arm, had transformed into the architect of his downfall. Kenneth had filed the papers. The FBI had received their evidence. Dante Valerian was now officially separated from his wife and cooperating with federal authorities in exchange for reduced charges. Reduced. Not eliminated. He'd still face trial. Still probably serve time. But not life. Not the complete annihilation Isla could have delivered. The mercy bothered him more than the betrayal. At 10 a.m., Isla walked into the sanctuary. She wore jeans and a simple white blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger than her 30 years, lighter somehow, as if divorcing him had physically lifted weight from her shoulders. Dante waited 5 minutes, then followed her inside. The shop smelled like coffee and old books and something else, something he couldn't quite name. Peace, maybe. Safety. Isla sat in the back corner at a table with 4 other women. They were laughing about something, easy and genuine. When Isla saw him, the laughter died. Ladies, give me a moment. Her voice was steady, but her friends closed ranks around her protectively. One of them, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair, glared at Dante with the kind of hatred that couldn't be manufactured. "We'll be right over there," Silverhair said, loud enough for everyone in the shop to hear. "You just say the word, Isla." When they were alone, Isla folded her hands on the table. "You shouldn't be here. I signed your papers. I gave you everything you wanted. You gave me what I was owed. There's a difference." She took a sip of her coffee, unhurried. "What do you want, Dante?" What did he want? To understand. To rage. To beg. To ask how the woman who'd once looked at him with something resembling love had found it in herself to destroy him so completely. Instead, he asked, "When did you stop loving me?" Isla's laugh was bitter. "That's what you came here to ask? When I stopped loving you." She leaned forward, and he saw the exhaustion beneath her composed exterior. "I stopped loving you when I realized you never actually loved me. You loved the idea of me. The smart lawyer wife who made you look legitimate. The woman who could talk about Proust at dinner parties and make your mother happy. But you never loved Isla. You never wanted to know who I actually was." "That's not true." When's my birthday, Dante?" The question hit him like a slap. He opened his mouth, closed it. He knew it. He definitely knew it. But in that moment, with her dark eyes cutting through every excuse he'd ever made, the date wouldn't come. "It's June 7th, she said softly. "We've been married 7 years. You've forgotten my birthday 4 times. You've missed our anniversary 3 times. You forgot about my father's funeral because you were in a meeting with Victor." Her voice cracked. "I buried my father alone while you negotiated a drug deal." The memory came back to him with sickening clarity. 3 years ago. Her father's heart attack. She'd called him sobbing, and he'd promised to meet her at the hospital. Then Victor had called about the shipment from Miami, and he'd made a choice. He'd told himself he'd make it up to her later. Send flowers. Buy her something expensive. He'd never actually gone to the funeral. "Isla, You what?" "You're sorry." She shook her head. "You're not sorry for hurting me. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you lost control. But you're not actually sorry for any of the pain you caused, because you never thought I was worth considering in your decisions." Dante felt something crumbling inside his chest. "I was trying to build something. To give you the life you deserved. I didn't want your money. I wanted you." Isla's eyes were bright with tears she refused to shed. "The real you. The man I met at that gala who laughed at my accusations and took me to dinner and stayed up until 3 in the morning talking about everything and nothing. That man? I loved him. But he disappeared the moment we got married. You became your father. You became the empire. And I became furniture in your perfectly decorated house." The truth of it settled over him like concrete. He'd spent 7 years taking her for granted, assuming her love was a given, that she'd always be there waiting while he built his kingdom. It had never occurred to him that she might be building something too. Her own independence. Her own revenge. "The book club," he said. It was never just a book club. It was a support group. For women married to powerful men who'd lost themselves in their husbands' shadows. Isla glanced at her friends, who were still watching from across the shop. "Rachel started it. Special Agent Torres. She'd been married to a cop who treated her like an accessory. When she started investigating you, she recognized what I was going through. She offered me a way out." "So this whole thing was the FBI's plan?" "No." Isla's voice hardened. "This was my plan. Rachel gave me the tools and the protection, but the strategy? That was all me. Every recording, every document, every perfectly timed revelation. I learned from the best, after all. I watched you manipulate and scheme for 7 years. You were an excellent teacher." There was pride in her voice, and Dante realized with stunning clarity that he'd never been more attracted to her than he was in this moment. Seeing her powerful, strategic, ruthless. Seeing her exactly the way he saw himself. "The warehouse fire," he said. You know 3 people died. I know. Her composure cracked slightly. I know exactly what you've done, Dante. Every crime. Every casualty. And I had to decide whether loving you was worth being complicit in all of it. The answer was no. It took me too long to realize it, but the answer was no. Here's something I've been thinking about since uncovering the story. If someone you loved became someone you couldn't recognize, at what point would you choose yourself over them? Would you stay and hope they change, or would you plan your escape? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I genuinely want to know where you draw that line. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Dante pled guilty to racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy in exchange for 15 years with the possibility of parole in 10. His underboss Victor disappeared 3 days before his own trial, and they found his body in Lake Michigan 2 weeks later. The Valerian organization crumbled like a house of cards, with Dante's cousins and lieutenants either fleeing or taking their own plea deals. Through it all, Isla attended every single day of his trial. Not beside him as his wife, but in the gallery with Special Agent Torres. Watching. Bearing witness to the consequences of 7 years of choices. The judge was a woman named Helena Park, 63 years old with a reputation for harsh sentences and no tolerance for organized crime. When she looked at Dante during his sentencing, her expression held no mercy. Mr. Valerian, you come from a family that has poisoned this city for 3 generations. You've used your wealth and influence to corrupt officials, intimidate witnesses, and destroy lives. The only reason you're not receiving a life sentence is because of your cooperation and the testimony of your wife, who showed remarkable courage in bringing you to justice. Judge Park's gaze shifted to Isla. Mrs. Valerian, I want to commend you for your bravery. Women like you, who find the strength to leave situations where they're diminished and manipulated, are the real heroes in this courtroom. I hope you find peace and rebuild the life you deserve. In the holding cell afterward, Dante was allowed one final conversation with Isla before his transfer to federal prison. She came alone, without her lawyer, without Agent Torres. Just her, in a simple black dress that reminded him of the one she'd worn to their wedding reception's after party. Why did you come every day? He asked through the glass partition. You gave them everything they needed. You could have disappeared. Because I needed to see it through. Isla's reflection in the glass looked like a ghost. I needed to watch you face consequences for once in your life. Your father never did. Your grandfather never did. Someone had to break the cycle. You sound like you still care what happens to me. I'll always care, Dante. That's the tragedy of it. She pressed her palm against the glass. I spent 7 years loving you. That doesn't just evaporate because you betrayed me. It transforms into something else. Grief, maybe. Or acceptance. Dante matched her gesture, his hand against the glass where hers rested. In prison, I'll have a lot of time to think. To understand what I lost. Don't waste it on regret, Isla said. Use it to become someone different. Someone who sees people as humans instead of assets. She stood to leave, then paused. I'm keeping your mother's wedding ring. The one your grandmother brought from Sicily. Consider it payment for the years I spent pretending I didn't know who you really were. Isla. Goodbye, Dante. I hope 15 years is enough time to find the man I fell in love with. Because he was worth saving. You just buried him so deep, even I couldn't reach him anymore. She walked away, and Dante watched until she disappeared around the corner. The guard came to take him back to his cell, and for the first time since his father's funeral, Dante Valerian cried. The months that followed were brutal. Federal prison stripped away every layer of identity he'd built. He wasn't a boss anymore. He wasn't powerful or feared. He was inmate 847,293, and he learned very quickly that without his organization's protection, he was vulnerable in ways he'd never imagined. 6 months into his sentence, he received his first letter from Isla. It was short, just 3 paragraphs written in her elegant handwriting. Dante, I've moved to Portland. Fresh start, new city, new job with a firm that does immigration law. I'm helping people instead of defending them. It feels right. Your mother asks about you. I told her you're getting what you deserve, but I said it kindly. She cried. I held her. She's the only piece of your old life I'm keeping. I heard you're taking college courses in prison. Literature and philosophy. Good. Maybe you'll finally read the Proust I always talked about. Maybe you'll understand why I love those books so much. They're about memory and time and how we construct meaning from loss. Sound familiar? I'm not writing to give you hope. I'm writing to give you clarity. This is goodbye. Real goodbye. I needed you to know I'm okay. I'm more than okay. I'm free. He read that letter 100 times. 1,000. He memorized every curve of her handwriting, every subtle implication in her word choices. She was free. She'd escaped him, escaped the shadow of his empire, and built something new. Meanwhile, he was trapped in a 6x8 cell, finally forced to confront who he'd become. Dante started attending the prison's therapy groups. Anger management, first, because he'd thrown a chair through the common room window when another inmate made a comment about Isla. Then counseling for childhood trauma, unpacking the toxic legacy his father had passed down like a genetic disease. His therapist, Dr. Okafor, was a patient woman from Nigeria who refused to let him hide behind justifications. You tell yourself you had no choice, she said during one session, 2 years into his sentence. That your family's business was your destiny. But your wife had the same lack of choice. She was trapped in a marriage to a criminal. Yet she found a way to choose herself. Why couldn't you? I thought I was building something that mattered. You were building a prison. For yourself and everyone around you. The only difference is you had the keys. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. He'd been so obsessed with maintaining his father's empire, with proving himself worthy of the Valerian name, that he'd locked himself into a life he never questioned. Isla had loved him before he became that prison. And he'd forced her to live in it with him. For years into his sentence, Dante received news that changed everything. His mother had died of a stroke, sudden and devastating. They allowed him to attend the funeral in shackles, surrounded by federal marshals. The church was nearly empty, his family's name had become poison in Chicago, and the few people who came were there for his mother, not him. But Isla was there. In the back row, wearing black, her face older but somehow softer. When his eyes met hers, she didn't look away. She just nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement that his mother had mattered to her. After the burial, the marshals gave him 5 minutes. Isla approached him slowly, cautiously, like you might approach a wounded animal. She talked about you until the end, Isla said. She never stopped believing you could change. Did you? I stopped needing you to. She glanced at his shackles. How much longer? 6 years if I maintain good behavior. Maybe less with continued cooperation. What will you do when you get out? The question hung between them like smoke. What would he do? His organization was gone, seized by the government. His assets were frozen except for the small trust his mother had left him. The Valerian name was mud. He'd leave prison with nothing except the man he'd become in the darkness of a cell. I don't know, Dante admitted. For the first time in my life, I genuinely don't know. Something flickered in Isla's eyes. Not hope, exactly. Recognition, maybe. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in years. The marshals signaled their time was up. As they led him away, Isla called out Dante. He turned. I forgive you. Not for you. For me. So I can finally let go of the anger. Her voice carried across the cemetery. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It means acceptance. I accept that you weren't capable of being who I needed. And I accept that I'm better off without you. 5 years and 3 months later, Dante Valerian walked out of federal prison into a Chicago morning that felt alien and familiar all at once. The city had changed. His old territory in the North Side had been gentrified, his family's restaurants sold to new owners, the warehouses converted into luxury lofts. The Valerian Empire had been erased from Chicago's landscape as thoroughly as his name had been erased from polite society. He was 45 years old. He'd spent nearly a decade in prison. He had $47,000 from his mother's trust, no job prospects, and a felony record that made him unhireable for anything except manual labor. His cousins had relocated to Nevada and wanted nothing to do with him. Victor was dead. His father's old associates treated him like a ghost. The halfway house where he was required to live for 6 months was in Pilsen, a neighborhood he'd barely known during his old life. His parole officer, a tired man named Rodriguez, laid out the terms with bureaucratic efficiency: weekly meetings, random drug tests, employment within 30 days, no contact with known criminals. "You've got a degree now," Rodriguez noted, flipping through Dante's file. "Bachelor's in literature. That's something." It was something. During his 9 years inside, Dante had completed his undergraduate degree through a prison program. He'd read everything Isla had ever recommended: Proust, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Morrison. He'd written essays about guilt and redemption, about the nature of choice and consequence. His professors had praised his work, never knowing that every word was written in the shadow of his ex-wife's absence. His first job was at a community college library, shelving books and helping students with research. The pay was minimal, barely enough to cover his expenses, but Dante found something unexpected in the work: peace. The quiet of the library, the smell of old books, the simple satisfaction of organizing chaos into order. 3 months after his release, he saw her name in the newspaper. Not Isla Valerian anymore. Isla Moretti, back to her maiden name. She'd written an op-ed for the Tribune about criminal justice reform, about the need for better support systems for women trapped in relationships with criminals. Her photo accompanied the article. She looked different, her hair shorter, laugh lines around her eyes. Happy. The article mentioned that she'd remarried. A civil rights attorney named David Chin. No, wait, Dante caught himself. That would be too predictable. The article said David Osei, a civil rights attorney she'd met through her work. They lived in Portland with their 2-year-old daughter. Dante felt the news like a blade between his ribs. She'd moved on, built a life, had a child with someone who probably deserved her in ways he never had. He should have been happy for her. Instead, he felt the ghost of something he'd lost 9 years ago when he'd signed those divorce papers at dawn. That night, he wrote her a letter. He'd written hundreds during his incarceration, but he'd never sent them, afraid of seeming pathetic or manipulative. This one was different. Isla, I saw your article in the Tribune. Your daughter is beautiful. I'm happy you found someone who can give you the life I couldn't. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I'm writing because my therapist says I need to make amends, and you're at the top of a very long list. Not because I think you need my apology, but because I need to give it. I'm sorry. For everything. For taking you for granted. For missing your father's funeral. For every birthday I forgot and every promise I broke. For making you feel invisible in your own marriage. For forcing you to become someone capable of destroying me just to save yourself. You were right about everything. I buried the man you loved under layers of ego and violence and my father's expectations. I became the empire instead of the human being. And I lost you because I never valued what we had until it was gone. I don't expect forgiveness. You already gave me that, more than I deserved. I just wanted you to know that the last 9 years taught me something. I'm capable of change, but only when I have no other choice. You gave me that gift when you walked away. You saved my life by destroying it. I hope your daughter inherits your strength and your intelligence. I hope your husband knows how lucky he is. I hope you found the peace you always deserved. With respect and regret. Dante. He sent the letter, not expecting a response. 2 weeks later, he got one. Dante. Your letter arrived the same day I was preparing a presentation about restorative justice. The timing felt significant. Thank you for your apology. I accept it, though as I told you years ago, I'd already forgiven you for my own peace. But I appreciate you taking accountability. Growth is uncomfortable, and I'm glad you've done that work. I want to tell you something I've never said. I used to dream about you changing. About you waking up one day and becoming the man I married. I grieved that version of you for years, even while plotting your downfall. The woman who brought down your empire was also the woman who mourned what we could have been. But here's what I've learned. Some relationships are meant to teach us what we won't tolerate. You taught me that I'm strong enough to walk away from anything that diminishes me. That's a gift, even though receiving it almost destroyed me. My daughter's name is Amara. It means eternal in Sanskrit. I named her that because I wanted her to understand that she comes from a line of women who survive, who persist, who become eternal by refusing to disappear. You asked about David. He's kind. He remembers my birthday. He came to my father's grave with me on the anniversary and held me while I cried. He's not exciting or dangerous or complicated. He's just good. And after years of chaos, good is exactly what I needed. I don't know what your future holds, Dante, but I hope you find a way to use your experiences to help others. You understand the seduction of power, the cost of violence, the weight of generational trauma. That understanding could be valuable if you choose to share it. This will be my last letter. Not because of anger, but because we both need to release each other fully. You are my past. David and Amara are my present. And my future is mine to build without the shadow of what we were. I wish you well. I mean that sincerely. Isla. Dante folded the letter and put it in the same box where he kept his mother's rosary and his college diploma. Then he did something he hadn't done in nearly a decade. He made a plan that wasn't about rebuilding power or reclaiming what he'd lost. He made a plan about moving forward. 3 years after his release from prison, Dante Valerian stood in front of a group of 20 teenagers at a community center on Chicago's West Side. They were kids from the same neighborhoods that had fed his father's organization, young people staring down the same paths he'd walked. The community center director, a woman named Tomas who'd lost her brother to gang violence, had hired Dante to speak about his experiences. Most of you know who I am, Dante began, his voice steady despite his nerves. Or you know who I was. Dante Valerian. My family ran the North Side for 3 generations. I inherited an empire at 28 and thought I was invincible. By 35, I'd lost everything that mattered. By 40, I was in federal prison. Now I'm 48. I work at a library. I live in a studio apartment in Pilsen, and I'm here to tell you that the life you think you want will cost you everything you actually need. The kids stared at him with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. One boy, maybe 16, raised his hand. But you had money, right? Power? Respect? I had the illusion of those things, Dante said. The money was always temporary, built on crimes that would eventually catch up with me. The power was just fear dressed up in expensive suits. And respect? Real respect can't be built on violence and intimidation. That's just people being too afraid to tell you the truth. A girl in the back spoke up. What about your wife? The one who turned you in? You must hate her. Dante had been expecting this question for 3 years. I thought I would. When she first walked away, I spent months angry, feeling betrayed. But here's what I learned in prison. She didn't betray me. She saved herself from drowning in my choices. The hatred I felt was really just grief in disguise. Grief for who I could have been if I'd chosen differently. He pulled out his phone and showed them a photo. Not of Isla, but of a mural that had been painted in her father's honor at a park in Little Italy. This is Giacomo Moretti, my ex-wife's father. He ran a bakery for 40 years, treated everyone with kindness, and died knowing he'd made his neighborhood better. 200 people came to his funeral. When my father died, only 12 people showed up, and half of them were there to make sure he was really dead. The room was silent now, the kids listening with an intensity Dante recognized. They were hungry for something real, tired of the lies that poverty and violence told them about success. I can't give you back the years I wasted, Dante continued. But I can tell you what I wish someone had told me. The empire you build on other people's pain will eventually collapse on you. The only legacy that matters is how you treat the people who can't fight back. The only power that lasts is the power to make someone's life better instead of worse. After the session, Director Tomas approached him. That was good. The kids need to hear from someone who's lived it. Would you consider doing this regularly? We could pay you a stipend. I'd do it for free, Dante said. This is the first time in my life I've felt like I'm actually building something that matters. That night, Dante returned to his studio apartment and found an envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a wedding invitation, printed on cream cardstock in elegant script. Isla Moretti Ose and David Michael Ose. Request the honor of your presence at the celebration of their commitment renewal and the baptism of their daughter Amara. It was happening in 3 months. In Portland. There was a handwritten note tucked inside. Dante, David and I have been discussing this for a year, and I finally decided to send this. You don't have to come. I'll understand if receiving this is painful or unwelcome. But I've learned that healing sometimes means acknowledging our full stories, not just the comfortable parts. You were a significant chapter in my life, for better and worse. My daughter should know that people can change, that mistakes don't define us forever if we do the work to grow. If you come, you'll meet the man who loves me the way I always deserved. You'll see what my life looks like now. It might hurt, but it might also give you closure. The choice is yours. It always has been. For 3 months, Dante wrestled with the decision. His parole officer approved the travel. His library supervisor gave him the time off. His therapist encouraged him to go, saying it could be an important step in his healing. But Dante wasn't sure he was strong enough to watch Isla stand beside another man, to see the life she'd built from the ashes of their marriage. In the end, it was one of the kids from the community center who made the decision for him. The 16-year-old boy who'd asked about power and respect approached Dante after a session. Mr. Valerian, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd made different choices? If you'd been the man your wife wanted? Dante considered the question carefully. Every day. But I've learned that wondering isn't useful unless it changes how I act today. The past is fixed. The future is still unwritten. The boy nodded slowly. My dad's in prison. Gang stuff. My mom says she's done with him, but I can tell she still loves him. Or who he used to be. I don't know. He looked at Dante with eyes too old for his face. Do you think people can really change? I think people can change when they decide the cost of staying the same is higher than the pain of transformation. Dante put his hand on the boy's shoulder. Your father has to make that choice. No one can make it for him. But you? You get to choose your own path. You're not bound by his mistakes. The boy left, and Dante realized he'd just given himself the answer about the wedding. He had to go. Not to reclaim something lost, but to demonstrate that change was possible, that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about facing it with honesty and humility. The flight to Portland felt like traveling to another planet. Dante had never been to the Pacific Northwest. The city was green and progressive and felt nothing like Chicago's hard edges. He stayed in a modest hotel near the venue, a botanical garden where the ceremony would take place. The morning of the event, Dante dressed in the one good suit he owned, a charcoal gray he'd bought for his parole hearings. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a man he barely recognized. Gray at his temples, lines around his eyes from years of prison sunlight, a body lean from limited food and exercise routines. But also something else, a clarity in his expression that had never been there before. The botanical garden was stunning, filled with roses and native plants, the air smelling like cedar and summer rain. Guests mingled on the lawn, a mix of Isla's colleagues, David's family, and friends Dante had never met. He stood at the edge, unsure whether to approach. Then he saw her. Isla wore a simple white dress, elegant and understated. Her daughter, Amara, clung to her leg, a beautiful child with Isla's dark eyes and a cascade of curls. David stood beside them, tall and warm, his arm around Isla's waist with a casual intimacy that spoke of real partnership. Isla saw Dante across the lawn. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world contracted to just the two of them. Then she smiled, not the cold smile from the divorce papers or the tired smile from the trial, but something genuine and peaceful. She walked over, Amara's hand in hers. "You came." "I almost didn't," Dante admitted. "But I'm learning to choose courage over comfort." "That's growth." Isla gestured to her daughter. "Amara, this is Mr. Valerian. He's an old friend of Mommy's." The child looked at him with the serious curiosity of small children. "Do you know my daddy?" "No, sweetheart, but I've heard wonderful things about him." David approached then, extending his hand. "Dante, I'm glad you could make it. Isla's told me a lot about you." There was no judgment in his voice, no posturing. Just the openness of a man secure enough in his relationship not to feel threatened by his wife's past. They shook hands, and Dante felt something release in his chest. This wasn't a competition. It was a celebration of the life Isla deserved. The ceremony was beautiful and brief. A female minister spoke about commitment and growth, about how love evolves when people choose each other every day. Isla and David renewed their vows with tears in their eyes, and when they kissed, their daughter clapped with pure joy. During the reception, Dante stayed at the periphery, content to observe. But Isla found him again, this time without her family. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know it couldn't have been easy." "It was one of the hardest things I've ever done," Dante said honestly. "But also one of the most important. I needed to see that you're genuinely happy. That what I lost you found." "I did find it. But not because David is perfect, he's not. He forgets to take out the trash and leaves his socks everywhere." Isla laughed. "I found it because I learned what I needed in a partner. Someone who sees me, who prioritizes me, who shows up. You taught me what I wouldn't accept. David taught me what I deserved." Dante nodded. "For what it's worth, I'm working with at-risk youth now, trying to keep kids from making my mistakes. It's not much, but it's something." "It's everything," Isla said softly. "That's the man I married. The one who cared about more than power. I'm glad you found him again." As the sun set over the botanical garden, Dante said his goodbyes. He hugged Isla, brief and respectful. He shook David's hand and told him to take care of her. He knelt down and told Amara that she had the best mommy in the world. On the flight back to Chicago, Dante thought about his mother's belief that he could change, about Isla's decision to give him the chance to prove it, about the teenagers at the community center who reminded him that breaking cycles was possible. He thought about redemption, not as a destination but as a daily practice. When he returned to his studio apartment, Dante wrote one final letter. Isla, I won't write to you again after this. You deserve to live your life without the ghost of our marriage hovering at the edges. But I wanted to thank you one last time. Not for the divorce or the prison sentence or the public humiliation. Thank you for seeing potential in me when I'd given up on myself. Thank you for refusing to let me destroy you along with myself. Thank you for teaching me that the strongest form of love sometimes looks like walking away. I'm not the man you married anymore. I'm not the man who went to prison either. I'm someone new, someone still learning who he wants to be. And every good choice I make, every kid I help, every day I choose to be better, those are because you refuse to let me stay comfortable in my destruction. You gave me the greatest gift anyone can give, the opportunity to become someone worth being. I hope Amara grows up knowing that her mother is the strongest person I've ever met. I hope she inherits your courage and David's kindness. And I hope she never needs to learn the hard lessons about love and power that you had to teach me. This is goodbye. Real, final goodbye. But not the bitter kind. The kind that's filled with gratitude and respect and the acknowledgement that some people change our lives by leaving them. Be happy, Isla. You earned it. With love and respect. Dante. 5 years later, Dante Valerian opened his own nonprofit organization called Second Chances. It operated out of a converted warehouse in Pilsen, offering mentorship, job training, and support for people leaving the criminal justice system. He hired formerly incarcerated individuals as counselors. He partnered with local businesses to provide employment. He spoke at schools and community centers, sharing his story without glamorizing his past. He never remarried. He dated occasionally, but he'd learned that he needed to be whole on his own before he could be healthy with someone else. His apartment remained modest. His lifestyle simple. He measured success not in money or power, but in the number of young people who chose different paths because of his work. On the 10th anniversary of his release from prison, a reporter from the Tribune interviewed him for a piece on criminal justice reform. The article ran with a photo of Dante surrounded by teenagers at Second Chances, all of them laughing at something off camera. Isla saw the article. She sent it to her daughter, who was now 12 and studying history. "This is the man I told you about," she wrote in the email. The one who had to lose everything to find out what really mattered. Amara read the article carefully, then asked her mother, "Did you love him?" "I did," Isla said. "Very much. But sometimes loving someone means letting them go so they can become who they're meant to be." "Do you think he's happy now?" Isla looked at the photo again. At Dante's genuine smile. At the way the kids around him leaned in, trusting him. At the life he'd built from ruins. "I think he's found something better than happiness. I think he's found purpose." That night, Isla showed David the article. He read it quietly, then pulled her close. "You saved his life by walking away." "No," Isla said. "He saved his own life. I just gave him the push." In Chicago, Dante sat in his office at Second Chances, reviewing grant applications for the next year. His phone buzzed with a notification, a message from an unknown number. "I saw your article. I'm proud of you. Keep changing lives. I." Dante smiled. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Some stories end not with dramatic reunions or second chances at romance, but with something quieter and more profound. The recognition that two people can love each other, hurt each other, and ultimately help each other become better versions of themselves precisely by letting go. He looked at the stack of applications on his desk, young people asking for help, for guidance, for someone to believe they could change. He thought about his father's empire, built on fear and violence, now completely erased. And he thought about the empire he was building now, constructed from hope and second chances and the belief that no one is beyond redemption if they're willing to do the work. Dante Valerian had been a mafia boss. He'd been a husband. He'd been a prisoner. Now he was something he'd never imagined he could be, a man who learned that the greatest power wasn't in dominating others, but in helping them find their own strength. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. Not revenge. Not reconciliation. Not even forgiveness. Just the quiet, difficult, beautiful work of becoming someone worthy of the second chance Isla had given him by walking away. The story doesn't end with them back together. It ends with something better. Two people who loved each other, destroyed each other, and ultimately freed each other to become who they were always meant to be. Isla found her happiness with David and Amara. Dante found his purpose in helping others avoid his mistakes. And maybe that's what real love looks like sometimes, not holding on, but knowing when to let go. Not changing for someone else, but being changed by the courage it takes to leave. Not happily ever after, but something more honest, healing, growth, and the hard-won peace that comes from finally choosing yourself. You've just heard a story about the price of power, the cost of betrayal, and the possibility of redemption. If this resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between loving someone and saving yourself, I need you to do something for me. Share this story. Not because I need the views, though I won't lie, they help, but because someone in your life needs to hear that walking away from toxicity isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. And someone else needs to hear that change is possible, even when you've destroyed everything good in your life. Hit that share button. Tag someone who needs this message. And subscribe if you believe in stories that tell the truth about love, power, and the courage it takes to start over. Don't just scroll past this. These stories matter because they reflect the real struggles we all face. Help me keep them alive.